So good morning. Today I'm joined by Lyneka Little, who is a Black American writer and social media strategist based in the US currently, although she was a Black American expat here in Paris. While she was in Paris, she created the Apres Josephine platform and network for French expats and natives who are interested in exploring their existence almost 100 years after the arrival of the world's first Black superstar, Josephine Baker.
Yeah.
Hello, Lyneka, and thank you for joining me today. How's it going?
Hey, thanks for having me. It's going pretty good. It's good weather day and etc. I'm coming here from Atlanta today, so
Okay.
yeah, it's a great day. Happy to be here.
Okay, well that sounds good. So you are in the States right now in Atlanta, but you were here in Paris. Do you miss Paris?
I do. It took a minute because of the pandemic. I just was kind of like, I like being in this my bubble of being in a house, but now I'm like, oh wait, I'm missing Paris. I bought a ticket. I'll be there in August.
Okay, cool. That's I'll definitely have to see you when you come. So let me ask you, what motivated you to create a Pray Josephine?
So I decided around 2017, after I had been there for a year, that I needed to utilize my skill set that I already had. One, I'm a trained journalist. Like I spent years at the Wall Street Journal, ABC News. I freelance for Entrepreneur, things along those lines. So I had this experience in journalism, but I wasn't utilizing it while I was in France. Instead, I just was kind of like, I'm a student and I'm just here to be to be a student. But I recognized that there were a lot of holes in this, like when it came to journalism and talking about Black and brown and or people of color in France. And so I thought to myself, why don't I utilize the skill set that I have to tap into what I felt like was missing, in addition to utilizing it as a platform to amplify some of the voices of the marginalized people from France. So it just came about because there was space for it, and a lot of the reporting that I saw that was coming out of France, when I'm reading the New York Times and I'm reading the Post and things at that time, because things have changed, because Rukaya, I'm butchering her name, Rukaya
Right.
Diallo now has her column in the Washington Post, but in 2017 that didn't exist, right? But what I saw was, a lot of times when it came to who was commissioned to report on or write about what was happening in France, those voices were white. And I felt
Hmm.
like there was no reason why, if I can go to France and I can come in contact with Black French folks, one, two, Black American folks, and brown folks and things along those lines, there's no reason as to why some of the voices that were coming out of France weren't as diverse in 2017 or 2016. And it also, to me, what always traditionally happens when you have something like that is, if the majority, what America would call the majority, maybe in France they'd have different language surrounding it, but if the majority is controlling the narrative, it's very rare for them to actually try to go out and seek out these diverse voices, because the problem isn't that most of the stories that were being written by white folks. The issue was not passing passing the quote unquote mic, right? And saying, maybe this story isn't for me, or maybe I need to report on something outside of what I actually experienced. And so that's why Apres Josephine came out. It came about as a way to kind of occupy a space where you are building community, amplifying marginalized voices, and even for myself, taking myself out of the picture, right? We as Black American expats sometimes come places and we're like, I want to talk about my experience. And it's like the Black American experience is it's, I don't want to say it's equally privileged, but it is privileged as well. And so how do I go about being a good visitor to a place and space, right? Which is what I was to France. And I felt like, to me, if someone who was French and was, I mean, regardless of what their color was, came to America, I would find it really important for them to, if they're reporting on America, to have voices from Black Americans.
Right.
So, to me, it was my almost love letter of sort to the people that have taken me in, which have been, Black French folks. It's not to say that they're the only people that have taken me in, but Black French folks deserve a platform, and they do exist, and they exist in French. And I, am a struggle French student, so I mean, I did come with the privileged aspect of I want to do it in English.
Yeah. No, trust me, I overstand. I don't even understand. I overstand everything that you just said. I totally can emphasize with that. I introduced you as an expat, but I noticed in your Clubhouse bio, you identify yourself as an expat or former expat slash immigrant. What is the difference between those two for you?
So it's been it's tricky, right? I've noticed that people say there's a privilege in the label of expat, and it's usually given to white Americans, etc. I am not a white American. I am Black, but I had always identified as an expat primarily because I didn't view France as the place that would be my forever home. But then someone had mentioned, there's the dynamic of that privilege of being able to say, I'm not an immigrant, I'm an expat. And I wanted to, when I identify as immigrant, make it clear as well that I hold the space of believing we're all equal, regardless of however amount of time I plan to stay or be in any particular place. I don't, in my head, I particularly do not treat them as two different things, but I recognize that other people do. And I wanted to add that because I don't believe that there's shame in any of those. And in the role in being an immigrant, I don't see shame, and I believe that immigrants deserve equal rights to as locals and natives. And so I wanted to call that out because there's a constant debate surrounding that title and that label. And I personally, before I moved to France, had never thought about it because it just was like, I live in America and, I'm a descendant of enslaved people of America. So it had never, like, in America, when they say land of immigrants, I'm like, I'm not an immigrant. Right. My people did not migrate here. We were not, this was not a selection choice, which I mean, I understand that there's difficulty surrounding language. I've had someone who I know in France, when I said I wasn't an immigrant in America, or wasn't a descendant, ping me on Instagram, and they're like, what do you mean? Like, all Americans are immigrants. And I'm like, it just seems like you kind of have to have a little bit of more of a relationship with language, right? Because I think a lot of times everyone wants to put you in a box. You are this, you are that. And American slavery in particular, and I'm sure in other places as well, make you have to come to terms with there's not a this or that, right? It's not you're an immigrant or you're not an immigrant. I mean, it's not everybody's an immigrant. I am not an immigrant in America. But when I am in France, am I an immigrant? That's a question mark still that stands. It's still a question mark for me, but I definitely, identify as both. I am treated also, if you know the life in France. Before you speak and people know that you are American, how you are treated when you're walking in the streets is of that of an immigrant. It's only when people recognize, oh, you're American. Oh, okay. Well, you can stay seated right there. We like you.
You know what? I want to talk a little bit about that because I know exactly what you're referring to, but some people who haven't lived this life, they may not know what we're speaking about. But it is surprising to learn that even though you're Black, you're treated special or have this a special kind of privilege that is different than other Black people. Just because of the fact that you are American. I could be here in Paris. I'm Black. I could be next to a Black person. Maybe they're Black French. They were born here, or maybe they're like my husband, who is Senegalese French, and I'm maybe treated differently just off the fact that I'm American, even though I'm obviously black. I have like my American privilege that supersedes my black skin, which is fascinating.
Right. It's weird because I just had never, again, so I visited France for the first time in 2012. And my grandmother had passed away. I had a fear of flying. I didn't think I would ever make it to actually to France, because I was just like, if I fly when I need to in America. So I'm not crossing oceans to get to wherever. But after my grandmother passed, I connected my fear of flying to a fear of living, and I decided I was going to go. So I stopped in London, and that was the first place where I recognized this privilege, because like someone was warning me, when you get to France, make sure you watch out for the people from the Baltic Sea area. And I was like, I don't even know. I was like, what are you talking about? I had no clue. My geography is terrible. And I just was like, this seems wildly inappropriate, but okay, random white British man. So then we get to Paris, and, to be fair, I was hanging out with a consultant, a black French consultant, and he had access to a lot of parties, and we were all my friends were going out. I went out maybe 3 times, but when we went out to these parties, it was like, American, you're American, you could come in, like Michelle Obama, Barack Obama. I was like, why are we shouting out the president? What is this presidential shout out at the party? But okay, you get it where you fit in. I'm like, okay. So there was just this, everyone was so fascinated in 2012 by these Black Americans being here. We had drinks on us. You can get into the party. You can sit in the VIP without actually having VIP status. And it was, for that first month, I'm not gonna lie, I was like, it's a party. It was great. Yeah. I was like, this is the best place ever. I also at that time didn't think crime existed in France, so that just tells you where I was in the game, in the scheme of life. I was like, everybody's safe. You're walking down the street of Paris at 3 a.m. What? But then when I lived there, that's when I started to see, oh, wait a minute. What would happen was, someone would start talking about Black Africans to me. And I was like, pause, team, just in case you didn't realize, I'm Black. Yeah. And I'm like, not you. I'm like, no, it's me. Same. Right. Same. There's no switcheroo on that. We come from the same place. And it was just really shocking to me. And I had to realize, so I had to think really, what was my life experience going to be like, right? Was I going to lean into this privilege and be like, yes, I am Black American, and thus I am super, I don't know, ridiculous? Or was I going to use that as an opportunity to point out the problematic nature of this type of thinking? So for me, I just started to point out these type of things when it happened, or see something, say something, right? Where it was like, wait, what? And that even came from white Americans, right? I heard people, they didn't necessarily say. What was different is when you encounter white expats, what they talk about in regards to racism, right? Because they'll come to France and they'll say, racism's not the same in France. There's not as much racism because I can do this or I can do that. And you're like, do you even know Black people in France? I don't understand. Do you talk to Black people? Okay, do you have Black American friends? No? Oh, okay. So you're speaking from where? Where is this place of space? So it's really weird, because there's a real duality that comes from being Black and living abroad. And it means that you have to come to terms with what your privilege is, what it means. You have to confront it. You have to deal with a new layer of you, the you that you've never met. Wait, I didn't meet her. And what does she do when this happens? Right? When you're at a grocery store and someone, one of my friends who is American said she gets followed around a lot at some of the stores. I was like, I don't know why I don't necessarily get followed around as much, but maybe it's because I usually come in being like super American because I'm like, where is this? So they automatically are like, oh my God, this girl. Whereas other people might go like searching. I started off with, I'm looking for, can you help me? They're like, that's not my job. But yeah, there's an extreme privilege, and we've seen it from some of our greats when they talk about their experience living abroad, and that safety is a part of privilege because everyone wasn't as safe as them.
Yeah, that's true. So some people are aware of this privilege that exists, and that mostly comes from your personal experience of being here. And more specifically and historically, we've all read the stories from James Baldwin, who talked about his experience here. And your project was founded around Josephine Baker and how she was treated here. Reading about those stories, some Black Americans to this day, they have this idea that France is this utopia for Blacks. So what would you say to them? Would you agree that if you're a Black American, it can be a utopia for you or for Black Americans, or do you look at the bigger picture of how all Blacks are treated here, including Native Blacks or Afro Europeans, and you disagree that this could be a utopia or you find it problematic?
So I don't believe in any utopias. So there's that.
Okay.
So I mean, I also recognize that French Americans, French people can come to America and have that same level of privilege that I would have when I go to France, right? So it's the dynamic of we are not responsible for your people's predicament, so we treat you better than the ones that we have a debt to.
That's a good way to put
it. So there's that understanding surrounding that. But I know people, they talk to me about France all the time, and I tell them, you should go to France. I like France. So, I can't say, I don't love it. I mean, I lived there for 4 years because I like the place. I like the people. There are problems. It should not be thought of or processed as a utopia. And to me, everyone owes a debt to the marginalized community in the space that they occupy. So if you are someone I met in Paris, moved to America to go to law school here in DC. She's a Black girl. I told her, please, when you get to America, ensure that you make Black American friends. Because I understand also the ease in which by moving as an expat or even an immigrant of a certain socioeconomic status, you are kind of placed into white circles. So you have to make it a priority to find or look for your diverse community. So I tell people, you can go to France, but you need to be also aware of these things, right? Around this time, last year, George Floyd was murdered. Less than a month later, there were large Black Lives Matter protests happening across the world, including in France. Had a massive gathering, and it's so to me, it's like, but George Floyd wasn't not George Floyd was amplified all of these things across the nation, but there was also the murder in France of the young man whose name I'm not going to say because I'm going to butcher it. What's his name?
Adama? No.
Is it Adama?
About the one whose sister is Adama Traore.
Okay, let me get my pronunciation. I'm really bad at names, so I usually try to avoid saying names just because overall I'm terrible at names. But yeah, after following, and I mean this was years ago, but it was his sister who led that, who was a part of what amplified Black Lives Matter in France, right?
Asa.
Yeah, and but people look at it and they were thinking, oh, it's just like all across the world, it's just George Floyd. And it's like, but this is a problem across the world. So we have to look at this broader thing. Like you can't escape police violence by going to France, right? Like there might be less, and maybe I shouldn't say that because now I'm like, woo, gotta be nervous, you know. But I mean, there's just no way to escape. At this moment, there's no way to escape violence against a person based on Blackness, right? So you have nowhere to go. And I think oftentimes people are thinking, I'll move here. And like, and it's not even just Europe. People are like, I'm gonna move to Costa Rica or whatever. And it's just like, so okay, are we just ignoring like the communities that are there and what's happening?
Or even in some African countries, they experience brutality. It's just that the people who are afflicting it upon people look like you. I mean, but if you look at in the States, there's black cops that are beating black people as well. So
yeah, when it comes to the utopia, what I've realized though is, and I was doing this too. So this is a statement against myself as well. Oftentimes when we're talking about like Baldwin and Josephine Baker, etc., there are other articles that exist that kind of explain a little bit more and give more context. For example, I just recently read this piece about that Henry Louis Gates wrote in his 20s, because he was he did like a fellowship in London, and he was like, can I tell a story about Black expats in France? And so they sent him to interview Josephine Baker and I guess several other Black expats. But when he went to see Josephine Baker, she was like, bring that Jimmy, talking about James Baldwin. Right. So he goes to get James Baldwin so he can go to visit, so he could have this interview with Josephine Baker. And the piece actually never ran because after he wrote it, Time Magazine, it was written for Time Magazine, I believe, and they were like, oh, they're passe. Can you imagine there was a period of time where they were like, they were passe? Are you kidding me? Well, they were like, this is so crazy to me. But when I was reading this piece, which was brought to my attention by someone on Twitter, because I actually had to buy the book to read, I'm like, so this piece isn't just like even readily available. One of the things, so I had started to be a little bit hard on that generation of expats, because as we all can be, like when we're the younger generation, we're like, well, why didn't they do this or why didn't they do that? But then there were things that maybe I hadn't pieced together or I hadn't read and really thought that deeply about. And so it's like ever growing in terms of like my thought process, because when I think of Josephine Baker, also one of the reasons why I selected her was because she can be considered a little problematic, right? So it's like the questions surrounding her are so even relevant in present time, like playing up to stereotypes and things like, you got the banana skirt, like what is going on, man? Like things that that, I mean, but I was judging with 21st century eyes, right? Which is not fair to her. And I don't, I just need to expand more in listening to what critics say. But what I found to be interesting was when I thought about her being in France, I was like, oh, she just was living in France forever because, choice. And I knew I knew there was like problems with people trying to investigate her in the States and things like that. But I didn't know that she couldn't come back to the States. I didn't realize that was not her choice, right? So in this article, it talks about like her from her own words being like, well, she couldn't come back because, she was under, they were saying they would send someone if she came to the airport, things like that. So, it's crazy because for me, my brain is always like, can America be denied the ability to return to America? To America if you're American? And now we see all these, we see all the chaos and crazy that's happening now surrounding, dissent and things along those lines. But she talked about in the piece seeing someone, a pregnant woman, have their child cut out of them.
Mm.
And this trauma is like, it's not that I didn't think about it, but there's certain, I never thought about the intensity in connection to her, right? It's just like, oh, she moved to Paris and she just lived an exciting life and she escaped racism and thinking of racism in certain ways, but being forced to be confronted with the imagery of what she experienced, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I totally get it. Well, where you can get somewhere and be like, every man for themselves, man. Like I'm trying to live. Because there's a thing that, you know, as much as I say that people have a debt to marginalized people, you also owe yourself Black joy. And you don't owe yourself the responsibility of being responsible for everyone.
Yeah.
And there's that, because there's that, like, that early death comes from all of this stress that we have surrounding racism and what we have to deal with. And I don't want to put people in a box and saying, you know, why aren't you talking? Because people show up in different ways. And one of the things that I found to be interesting too was she was talking about her experience in France, and one of her greatest worries was running into, maybe not one of her greatest, but one of her worries, what she mentioned, was running into white Americans while she was in France. The experience that she would have with, because, and I'm like, no one ever talks about that. Like I've never, or I shouldn't say no one ever talks about that. I had not yet read that sort of commentary surrounding that. Like I never, like, you're like, okay, so she got to France, and then, because when we think about Josephine Baker, we see predominantly white circles that she was moving in, and so to me, I was like, well, where were the Black people? Did you have Black friends? But I mean, I'm sure she had some Black friends, but I'm just saying, like, when you see what is amplified, you see. But I mean, that's also a product of media and time, right? People make everyone a little bit more like, this is what, you know, Malcolm X, this is what Martin Luther King just had a dream. And you're like, I don't feel like there was more to this. But I mean, I guess to me, I guess what I would say to people is dig a little more deeper. And even to myself, like, I'm like, I love learning. I love, like, me hearing, like, Josephine Baker was like, she was at a restaurant, and I think a white American came in and was like, why is she here? Like, she should have to leave or whatever, because she was Black. And that's the thing.
As used to segregation.
So it's like, as much as we talk about our movement and our escapism, to even circle back, like, when we talk about escapism, you're still moving with other expats that don't look like you, right? That still carry sometimes those same problems, right? And they don't even have to be in community with Black people when they're in France, right? So it's like, an American in France, or sorry, in America, will be called to the carpet for lack of diversity. An American in France will not be called to the carpet for lack of diversity. It will be par for the course. So, like, an understanding of how you're moving, who you're going to be moving among, has to be clear too.
Yeah. You know, that's a good point, and actually brings me to my next question about your community. So your community features voices of Blacks and of people of color, and I was wondering, you know, why not just focus on Black voice? What's the importance of expanding the community to people of color as well? Because when I think about Josephine Baker, I think about a specific Black American experience, both historically and today, as we've just been discussing. And when I think about including other voices, you know, brown voices. Well, when we say the term people of color, I could be talking about somebody from Morocco, somebody from
Right.
El Salvador. And I think that those types of people have totally different experiences, both historically and maybe perhaps in France. So why have like this broad community inclusive of you know, people of color and not just focus on Blacks?
So I think for me, I was kind of, when I think of marginalized people in France, I think the dynamic is completely different too, because, like, their marginalized community wouldn't necessarily be what I would think would be marginalized in America. right? Or I shouldn't say would be marginalized, but there's a different perception in America than in France of culturally of people. I don't know. I'm like, how do I trying to best explain it? But I mean, for me, I always wanted to be inclusive because for me, we all getting free. And the freedom of, like, in order for people to be free, we all have to be free. So like there's no way that, there's no way for just brown people to be free and black people not be free. Like, and that's the thing. I think what ends up, like, I guess for me, the motivation is partially because sometimes we kind of end up in groups, grouped identities and things along those lines. And it ends up being like almost every man for themselves, right? And for me, I don't think that we're moving or living in a world where it needs to be every man for themselves. Now, to be clear, I don't try, I do take Toni Morrison's words to heart, where I'm not trying to talk to, like, my work or what I'm doing with Apres Josephine is not to convince white folks of the humanity of black or brown people, right? My goal, though, is for all of us to learn how many things we have in common, and in how many ways we are pitted against each other for the gain of one other group, right? So it's like, if I recognize that when I'm in France, I can see and witness, like, discrimination against other groups of people that don't look like me. And I don't want to cut them out from the discussion because they don't look like me, right? So Apres Josephine, I want to amplify these particular voices, but I'm also inclusive. Like, I am willing to be inclusive to all groups, right? There's no rule, the community, like, you don't have to be, but you do have to be, though. What everyone has to be is they have to be curious, believe in the fact that we all are free, right? Because I think what people get confused about is they think that black folks and maybe even brown folks are asking them to be free. I'm not asking anybody for anything. You're not giving me my freedom. I am free, right? What I am recognizing is the power structures, systemic racism, and things along those lines, and how in this power structure that has been created and really, really, really amplified in the West, in America, right, has stretched its way up and over. And I don't even want to cite just America, because a lot of times people blame discrimination or racism on, no, that's just an American thing. I'm like, where do Americans come from? Where did they come from? That doesn't even make sense, right? But I wanted Apres Josephine to be a platform where people can find like-minded people who recognize that black folks are free, the LGBTQ community is free, brown folks are free. Like, I want it to be a judgment-free community. That's my hope. I mean, like, to me, I'm rooted in the belief that everyone deserves to right to move in a way that doesn't harm other people, right? It's like I don't want to say everyone deserves the right for a safe space or things along those lines, because I'm always like, what is a safe space? Like, I don't even know what this means. Like, you go, like, we were like, safe space. I'm like, black folks have never known a safe space. So what are y'all talking about when you say these safe spaces? But yeah, I mean, for me, I wanted to be inclusive. I wanted to highlight interesting people doing interesting things that you just don't see. And I think, to me, a part of, again, when we trace back to the debt, that I think that people should be paying. I mean, my debt is to people, to humans, and that is inclusive to brown folks who are very much more like discriminated against in France. So that's just a part of it.
Okay, yeah, that's true, and it makes sense. I personally, generally speaking, have a problem with the phrase "people of color." I think that it can be anti-black. And it's a way for people to be anti-black. They'll say, "Oh, I've hired a person of color who is from a non-black community," and that's their way of getting away with being inclusive, but not including black people. And then I think that in the international context is even more dangerous because you have people of color coming from countries in which they were the majority population. And then now I'm supposed to be categorized with them when my experience as a black person has developed because I was a minority in my country. And so we have two different backgrounds, and then really the only thing that we have in common sometimes is that we're both not white. So I was just curious, girl, but I totally get what you're saying.
I use POC when I'm being politically correct. Because I hate the term too. So but it's an easy phrase to go to, but then I also make sure that's why I say black and POC. So I never just say POC and then lump black people under that category. I say black and POC because I want to be clear that there are also two social dynamics, and the way that they are seen or viewed are engaged with are different. And they also, and I mean, it really, really varies by country, because again, a lot of the people that would be privileged in America aren't necessarily privileged in France. And to me, that was probably one of the most shocking things. I was like, wait, aren't you the model minority in America? And then it's not the same in France. And I'm like, that was quite shocking to me. Not to say that, I know people take offense to model minority, and they should, but we know what it means, right? We know what we're referring to when we're talking about model minority and who American society is referring to when they say model minority. And suddenly the Black American is the model minority in France.
Yeah.
Which is not necessarily I shouldn't say not necessarily, it's not a good thing. But if I had to summarize it in a way, that would be the word. And it was one of the first things I said to a friend. I said, oh my God, in France, Black Americans are the model minority because they think we're going to leave. They think we have a certain level of education if we're there. And they think that we have a certain monetary status if we're there. And they believe they respect, I don't want to say they respect, but some respect our art and culture. And so in that sense, they're just like, you are great. And that is, they're like, we have no problems with you. And that's a weird space, like even with, surrounding your first question, immigrant and the difference between immigrant and expat, like a Black person goes to France and is almost viewed as a model minority, which we know what that means, right? And so you're like, wait, this is a whole new world. This is interesting. So it's crazy.
Who has been the most inspiring person that you've met throughout this project? Maybe someone that you've interviewed or someone who's contributed to your platform.
There's so many. This is gonna be hard. Hold on. I was like, I don't know how to answer this. In terms the people that so the Legend section of my page is my favorite because it's my dope people doing dope things, and the dope people doing dope things is it's where I say I've made a decision that no Americans can be in the Legend section, right? Because the intention being to amplify again voices in France. So for that particular section, that means I have to always go out of my comfort zone in terms of one, you got to meet new people, things like that, and oh wait, you're interesting, can I interview you? So, and every person that I've interviewed for the Legend section has really changed. There's a reason why I interviewed them, because of something. So whether it was, for example, Soraya Mila, who did the She's the creator of the Afropolitan series, the first Black French series, YouTube series. Assuming so. I cannot verify, but I will say so. Soraya, what she did with Afropolitan, dope. Tao has been like he did my video for Black Hair, one of the productions, but he's also like he went to, I believe, the Sorbonne for film school. He's a Black filmmaker, like doing dope things. Noun, who hosts these like amazing like events. He's an artist in France, a visual artist in France, but she spent some time in California. Who else? I interviewed Lucy, who was supposed to be starting Coven Paris, who I met at used to work at Bob's, but she started this book club, which was like super dope because it was like, yeah, they're reading English books in America. So I thought, that was great. She's pretty dope. And like everyone from I'm serious, like that I'm completely biased because I get to interview people that I really think are dope people. And I have I have one that I just finished up last night. And so I like want to add her, but I can't because I haven't published yet. Okay. But it's like a dope French filmmaker who I think everyone probably knows. And I'm just like super excited about this. Like I had a really great candid conversation with her. So super excited. But all of those people kind of like everybody in the Liaison section has added some value because it keeps me going. Because me being able to do these interviews with like, there's a translator who I've been working on a piece with and I'm waiting for a piece, but she translated Their Eyes Were Watching God. I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, this is so like the Liaison section is the section that is the reason why Apres Josephine will continue to exist, because when I do those things, like it gives me great joy. Now it takes a lot of time nowadays because I have 2 other jobs right now, but like that. My logo was done by my friend Caroline, who is biracial French woman. My friends, Magali and Vanessa, who, I have tapped into for certain things. Then I have like editor friends from New York and like throughout different places who were the first people to look at Apres Josephine. I had one of my friends who was a former editor at one of my old jobs. She actually did the editing for the first 7 pieces of that. And then there's like people like have you met your name the other Chanel?
No.
So there's another Chanel who like she's one of my good friends, one of the first Black people that I met at a hostel. And we've been friends ever since. So she's in the hair video and she did the hair story for me. But I've been completely inspired. The community that is formed and the fact that, I'm always surprised because I learned that people are talking about it. And like someone reached out to me because they were like, someone on Lipstick Alley told me. I was like, I made it to Lipstick Alley.
Wow, that's random.
Lipstick Alley. This is the
because you posted someone's baller boyfriend. That's really random.
I was like, oh snap! I was like, Lipstick Alley. I had the screens. I couldn't click on the board. I finally found the thread, but then it must be behind like that secret wall area.
Yeah.
But I was like, I made it. Like, what kind of? But no, it was like someone had asked, had an encounter, and they were living in France, and they were Black, and someone was like, you should reach out to Apres Josephine, and I was like, who is this person? I need to find them. They need to be my friend. Shout out to that person.
Cool.
But I just like, to me, I've had a lot of people that have been very supportive, and Apres Josephine would not be what it is without the people who are willing to just kind of like show up, be there. Because like, this, there are some people that do not show up. Yeah. You're like, dang, I thought you like, there are some people that I thought had nabbed for an interview, and I'm super excited, and I'm like, oh my God, you know, we've done all these like scheduling and things like that, and then they fall through, and I'm like, but wait, what? Like, and to me, I try not to take these things personally, but I do, because I am who I am. Like, I'm like, I shouldn't take this personal, but at the same time, I'm like, ooh, I don't like that person no more. So, but it's just been supportive community, people that surprisingly would show up, people that I didn't necessarily know. Like, you know, I think in Paris, I have this reputation as a girl that's extremely intense, which is probably right, which is not wrong or right. But then people are very surprised because I'm also kind of chill and laid back. And I'm like, yeah, I could be I could be all three of those things. Right. So it's always surprising to me, because I do think that people kind of react to me as a person who is very direct.
Yeah.
And it surprises them. So then when those people, you know, realize like the humanity of it all, and they come out and they show up, I'm like it's all good. It's all cool. Like, I'm not, just because I'm talking about racism in France suddenly doesn't mean that I hate everyone, right? Because that's the thing too. When you start talking about race in any race issue, everyone's like, oh, are you talking about me? Am I the person? And it's like, the you isn't always literal. I mean, sometimes it can be, but it isn't always literal. And, you know, being called out for problematic behavior doesn't mean that you should run from it. It means that you recognize it. And you're like, dang, like, I've been called out for problematic behavior. And I'm like, you know, when you speak like people that I'm grateful for, I am very grateful to the people that call me out when I'm on some shit. Because you need that. And when you move to another country, you need it even more. It's so important, because you don't have your community of friends at home that have known you since day one, who are like, girl, stop playing with me. So you got to find like your circle of friends who can be like, girl, stop playing with me. Like, you need that group. And I think that we all can kind of fall in these circles. And this is relevant to every expat, where white, black, brown, etc., where you're moving to a new world. Maybe you have one friend that you've known from home, but usually probably not. So you have like no one that has your history. Mm-hmm. And your history is necessary, because usually the way that you accept being called out for your shit is if it's by someone that hasn't or knows your history. So like, for me, just for Apres Josephine, what has been inspiring to me is even the faceless people who then, you know, become like, then I fully see their face, right? And I don't like, I'm using faceless as maybe in the wrong context, but like someone where you're just kind of like, oh, I didn't know who you were, and then you reached out, and now I know who you are, and now we're friends, and now you're able to just kind of be like, okay, well, you know, why this or why? So like when the friend came to who's going to law school in DC, I met her as like a friend. Like, her friend sent her to do a video for me, because I was doing a video for Apres Josephine. This girl made t-shirts, and she wasn't in town, so she was like, I'm going to send my friend. And she sent her friend, and I'm like, I don't know, I didn't know who this girl was. But she came, she wore the t-shirt, and we ended up remaining friends. And she's like 20 something. So usually, you know, we have this generational thing where we're like, I like friends over 30. But when she came to DC and even in France, we have these conversations surrounding what an expat and immigrant mean. Why, like, for her, she's like, well, wait, so why don't Black Americans like being called African Americans? Or like, you know, we can ask these like questions, right? And try to like catch up or understand, like, what does that mean to you? Like, you know, she really did recently ask me about the African American versus Black American, like, what's the difference? And I was like, you know, this is a really good question. Depending on who you're talking to, it means two different things to different people, right? You know, I'm like, I've always identified as Black. When I was being PC, I was African American, like POC. Then I stopped being POC with my identity because I was like, why do I have to be POC about my identity? Sorry, not POC. Why do I have to be PC about my identity? My identity is Black. I've always identified as Black. Why am I switching it up depending on what circle that I'm moving in so that you can be comfortable with my Blackness? Like, no, I'm still Black. So I'm like, for me, it just was a demonstration of the culture of Blackness too. Right. Because what ends up happening with Black Americans is people think that Black American is not a culture. So people are often at war with the Black American identity because when they hear Black, they think that we're only referring to race. And sometimes we're referring to race and culture. When we're referring to race and Black, the umbrella includes everyone. When we're referring to Black as culture, we're usually referring to Black American culture, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a distinct culture that Black Americans do have, and a lot of people are kind of at war with the idea that Black Americans can have a culture, which is weird to me. It's like, wait, how come everybody else gets to have a culture, but suddenly like Black American, that's too far. Y'all don't have a culture. Or people think it's funny to say that we don't have a culture. It's like there's nothing. If you take culture from people, what are they? So if your intention is to continuously take culture from us, it's to rob us of our identity. And that's not cool.
How can people access your community? What is the best way to look up your socials or your website?
So we're on Instagram at Apres Josephine. We are on Facebook at Apres Josephine. We are on Clubhouse at Apres Josephine. Haven't been as active on Clubhouse. Need to start kind of returning to that. On Twitter, but Twitter, like, I'm not really active. But Instagram, super active. People DM me and I follow up and things along those lines. You'll get my voice, or you'll hear from me. But yeah, Apres Josephine is the best way to find and follow. And we're pretty much on all social. And if you want to email Apres Josephine, then there's also our Gmail account.
Okay. Well, I hope everyone wrote that down and follow you across all of your social media web networks, and as well as the website. Check out the website and especially the legend section to read these cool stories from the people that you just mentioned. I thank you for your time today. We had a great conversation, and I'm excited to see what comes from the community next.